Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 44 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Keisha Blair for this episode. And so Keisha lives in Ottawa, Canada, which is fantastic because it's my second global interview, and I have a lot of listeners in Canada, so I'm really happy to talk with her. And Keisha just wrote a great new book. It's called Holistic Wealth, 32 Life Lessons to Help You Find Your Purpose, Prosperity, and Happiness. And this book actually comes out of her own experience, losing her husband when she was 31, and she had two very small kids at the time. Her first son was 3 or so years old, and the little one was just 8 weeks old when her husband died very unexpectedly. And so we talk about that in the episode, what it was like having such young children and all of a sudden being widowed. She was able to take a sabbatical, a very long one of a year, and then we talk about that and also going back to work after loss. Some of the struggles around having one son who was just barely old enough to have some memories of his dad, and then one son who's just so little that he had really no memories at all. And what that's been like. Her husband died about 10 years ago. So it's really good to get her reflections over this longer period of time. And also, of course, we talk about her new book, Holistic Wealth, and get some of her tips and ideas around that, and why that's so important. And the book grew out of a viral article that she had done a few years back, life lessons she had learned losing her husband at such a young age. So anyway, without further ado, I'll give you my discussion with Keisha Blair. My guest today is Keisha Blair, who is joining us from Ottawa, Canada. Keisha was 31 when her husband passed away suddenly, and it was just 8 weeks after the birth of their second child. Keisha is also a trained economist with extensive experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She's a graduate of the Executive Leadership Program at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and is the founder of several nonprofit initiatives. And now she has written a book called Holistic Wealth, 32 Life Lessons to Help You Find Purpose, Prosperity, and Happiness. And the book was actually just released last week. So Keisha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jenny. It's great to be here.
Yeah. I'm really happy to be talking with you today. And I have to say, this is only my second interview with a guest who is not in the U.S. And I'm especially happy that you're in Canada, because I actually have a lot of listeners in Canada and the UK and Australia. So this is really fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So before we get more into talking about your story and your journey, I was wondering if you could set the stage for us a little bit and read for us a passage from your new book. And it was actually excerpted in Thrive Global, which I'll post a link to that in the show notes as well. But would you mind reading us this passage from your book?
Sure. Let me start this off. Most of us don't realize how little time we have to live. We think we have endless days or years to make the changes we need. We think we're young and invincible, that our life cycle will follow a certain musical structure and rhythm, a set of rules and patterns around which we can plan and create a family. We depend on that rhythmic structure, a delicate balance of stressed and unstressed beats in an orchestral performance to bring meaning to the cycle of life. We are educated in these rhythms. Children are born to two loving parents who rear them into loving adults, who then procreate and then have grandchildren and so forth. We are used to a system of procreation and ancestry that preserves our history, culture, and memory, certain syncretized elements that hold the compositional patterns of our family, such as our genetic makeup, voice, and hear. Ancient systems of classifications were put forward based on linearity and direction. Time and the seasons move in a linear fashion. We have come to expect a certain pattern within the context of weather patterns, culture, history, and preservation of our heritage. In the months that followed Garfield's death, I realized I needed to live life on my own terms, doing the things that brought me real happiness and joy. The only chance we have is the here and now. You have today, and you will likely have tomorrow to live like you mean it. Don't wait for an unspecified time in the future to do it. Don't wait until you have to bargain and negotiate for something that is entirely out of your control.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't wait to hear more about your book. But let's table that for a minute, because I'd like to get into your journey as a widowed parent, because I think that I hear that listeners like to hear from other widowed parents about their journey and their reflections, because, it helps them not to feel maybe so alone if they don't know any other widowed parents who've been down this path. So why don't we start, if you don't mind, back way up before your husband died, before everything changed. What was life like way back then?
Yeah, so before he died, life was normal. We were, newly married, because we were only married for 7 years when he passed away. So we were still newlyweds, planning to have a family. We had just purchased our own home, and life was great. We were two young adults, just hoping for the best. We had our lives in front of us. Everything was going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
We were young, we were healthy, and there was nothing from stopping us from achieving our dreams. It was great. And then, I got pregnant and had my first child, Matthew. And what was it? 3-4 years later, I had Alexander, my second child. And then 8 weeks after that, Garfield came home and he complained of a pain in his abdomen. And we rushed him to the ER. And within 3 hours, he was dead.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow.
And it was earth-shattering. I mean, nobody expected that. As far as we knew, he wasn't sick. And so that night, the doctors had no answers. It was such a rare disease that most doctors will never see this in their lifetimes, only in textbooks. And so, it was just so rare that the autopsy took 1 year.
Really?
Yes, wow. And they had to assemble an international team of pathologists, everybody, all the experts, to figure out what this is.
Yeah.
And that's how bizarre it was. It was so strange, so surreal. So that kind of led me on a path to try to look for answers, just try to make sense of my world again. Because not only was I dealing with the grief and the death and the fact that I had just given birth 8 weeks prior and I was still healing from that.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'm hearing that this disease that nobody has ever heard of, most doctors have never seen. And it changed my perspective on life. It changed everything for me in terms of what I thought I knew, what I thought I could depend on, what I thought were, and that's why I talk about, that passage that I just read is so emotional for me, because when I talk about, we depend on that structure, we depend on that rhythm. That's what we're educated in. We never really think that it's going to go a different way. And we never really think it's going to happen where all the pieces just fall outside of our control.
Yeah.
And that's why that passage is like that, because it took years for me to try to make sense of it, just because the circumstances were just so bizarre.
Yeah. Wow. And so how many years ago was this?
This was 9 years ago.
Okay. Just for a little context here. And so your kids, so at the time they were 3 or 4 and 8 weeks old, brand new baby. Right? Yeah.
So at the time, just 2 kids. One was 3 years old. One was 8 weeks old, brand new baby. So
gotcha.
2. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that like, having a whole year basically without any answers as to even what happened and why? I mean, that I'm guessing that must have been destabilizing.
It was hugely destabilizing. And so imagine everybody asking you what happened and you have no answers. And We had relatives outside of the country who had not seen him before he passed away. And as far as everybody knew, he was healthy.
Yeah.
And here I am telling everyone almost close to a year that we have no answers.
Yeah.
It's just unimaginable grief. It compounds the grief by 10. And I remember calling the coroner's office because, the chief coroner for Ontario had to be called in. This was big.
Wow.
And imagine calling, asking for answers. Nobody has answers yet until finally 1 year after I got the report. And I remember just sitting and just crying when I opened the envelope and read what it was, because I was like, I have no idea what this is. And when I Googled it, pheochromocytoma, it was even worse. It was just like, what's this? And I remember carrying back the report to my doctor and to his doctor, and they said, listen, there's no way they would have caught this. There is just no way. We just have to just know that some things are just outside of our control, because nobody would have caught this in the 3 hours he went into the ER, much less even weeks. It's just too rare and just too... 70% of cases are found on autopsy because that's how rare it is. So most doctors don't know how to look for it, much less test for it.
Right.
So that's,
Right. Yeah. Gosh, that sounds scary. So those early months, years, whatever time period you think of as like the early period, aside from all this uncertainty that you just spoke about and those difficulties, what else, like how was that period maybe in relation to parenting? Now you had a brand new baby and it was just you and you had a toddler. What was that early time like in that aspect?
Yeah, so that was very, very difficult. I luckily, when he died, I was on maternity leave. So at least I didn't have to figure out daycare immediately, and at least I could take the time to plan ahead and figure out how I was going to move forward. But it was extremely difficult. Luckily, I had support. I had family, and that was very helpful. But in terms of self-care and in terms of being a mom and a new mom, because I was not only just a mom, but a new mom, dealing with the effects of not only labor and childbirth, but grief, it was extremely difficult. I remember the night I came home from the hospital when he died, and, Alex was home with my mom. And I remember my mom just saying, okay, I'll do the night shift. I'll do the 2-hour feedings, like every 2 hours, like clockwork, he was getting up. And so for me, even breastfeeding, there's so many things that just went to the wayside because like I couldn't process, handle, or even, think about all of that became a luxury. All of that became, and so tremendous help within the first few weeks and in the first few months going forward to even just get to the point where, the day-to-day could be taken care of. It's a tremendously difficult time to go through that when you've just given birth and
right.
Your husband just dies suddenly.
Yeah. That is a lot all at once.
Yeah.
And at what point did you go back to work then?
I went back to work because in Canada, I don't know if you know the system here, but we have a generous system of parental benefits. And so I went back to work 1.5 years afterwards because we get 1 year for maternity leave here in Canada, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
So that is great. And so I took that 1 year, in the book, there's a chapter on sabbaticals. And I took the 1 year and I took a sabbatical during that time. I left, I literally packed up and left and went somewhere else to deal with it. And so that's what I did. And I took an extra 6 months in addition to the 1 year. So I took 1.5 years.
Okay.
And luckily, because I had a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, and luckily I had the opportunity to do that and the luxury of being able to, because I just don't know how you do this with just taking, normally you get 1 week bereavement leave, right?
Right.
And so I just don't know how you do this without having that type of support in place. Like, picture having to bury your husband and in 1 week go back to work with a 3-year-old and an 8-week-old. I mean, how is that practically done? And so I just don't. And so that's what I did. And luckily I had some supports in place where I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Where did you go for your sabbatical?
So I went to Jamaica.
Aha.
Mm-hmm.
And how long were you there?
I was there for a year.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Had you been there before? Did you have any connections there? Or was it just a
yes.
first
My
time?
parents lived there.
Okay.
Like, I had lots of family there. And that was like home. And so it wasn't strange to me to do that. It wasn't strange at all to do that. And so, like, I took the time I needed, and it worked out great in terms of being able to renew and refresh, and being in a new culture, and not like a new culture, but being in a new situation, environment, away from where everything happened, of course, just gave me new perspective.
Right. And then you returned to Canada ultimately. And there was an interesting, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I'll put a link in the show notes. But they talked about, I forget what the title was, but it was about tips, if something's happening in your personal life and that it affects your workplace. And they talked about your example as one, and how you kind of navigated that when you went back into the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So afterwards, I came back, and I mean, whether or not I had been on a sabbatical, I guess just when you go back to work after something that happens like that, it's difficult. And it's difficult for people to know how to react as well, and to know what to say, and find appropriate things to say without either hurting you or feeling awkward. And so part of that, case study that I worked on with the Harvard Business Review was kind of navigating those set of circumstances in the workplace, and what to say, what to do, that kind of a thing. But ultimately for me, it was very difficult knowing that you went on leave to have a baby. And really what's overshadowed that, because when my colleagues wished me goodbye, it was for having a baby. It was to wish me well as going off to have my baby.
Yeah, a joyous occasion.
A joyous occasion, and it was a big shower and a party and a celebration. And when I walked back in the office, it was, oh my gosh, she lost her husband. And so nobody anticipated that. And it was just like, what do you say? What do you do? And so that was very difficult for me. And also being able to be calm, holding myself together in the face of going back, knowing how drastically my situation had changed.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll be sure to link that, excuse me, so people can take a look at that as well. Your kids now how old are they now?
Yeah, Matthew's 14, Alex is 10, and I have a daughter, Ella, who's 8. So actually it's actually 10 years now.
Okay. Yeah.
That he passed away. Yeah. Because Matthew was 3. He was like 3.5 thereabout.
Okay.
So it's around about then.
Yeah. And did I read somewhere that you've remarried since then as well?
Yes, and I have remarried since then.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So thinking about, so you've had a number of years now, I guess, do you have any observations on kind of navigating the school environment with your kids who are grieving? They're very young. I guess at that point they weren't even in school. I guess I'm curious, ultimately when they did enter school, is that something that was this an issue? Is something you needed to talk to the teachers about? each year they got a new teacher, tell them what's happened in your family, or kind of, I guess, how did you navigate that, and what are your thoughts around that?
I know it's such a good question, Jenny, because it was a huge transition. Matthew was just going into kindergarten, into JK, and so he lost his dad and then started school this September, and that was huge for him. And so I remember him starting school, and issues arose with like they would have a day at school where they brought in an ambulance. And I remember it like it was yesterday, where the teacher called me in and she said, "We had an incident today, the ambulance came in and Matthew just ran down the hallways screaming with his hands in the air, saying, oh my gosh," because he remembered that night when the ambulance came for his dad.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And since then, I mean, he's 14 now. He wouldn't, but like he went through years of seeing an ambulance and just being scared, because that's the thing that he associates with death. Because the last time he saw his dad was when he got into an ambulance, and he never came back. He never came back. Right. And so we had that issue. We had other issues with, sometimes Matthew would say things like, "I saw Daddy at school today. He came to visit me." And he would stare out the window thinking, yeah, my dad's there. And so he went through a huge transition time. And it wasn't easy for me, because some of the teachers didn't quite get childhood grief. And it almost, it was something that I really struggled with, because I thought, wow, like, what's not to get? Like, a child is grieving, and he's going to need extra support and understanding and patience and just a little more love and care. And I didn't get that feeling at first. And yes, you're right. With each teacher, and not even with each year that went by, but with every single teacher, it was the talk. It was like, well, yeah, his dad died, and this is what we're going through. And I mean, after a while, it became tiring. It became very tiring. And you're right. It wasn't just, it was year after year, different grades as new teachers came in. And I mean, we took the decision, like I took the decision to even allow him to change schools. So it was a big part of our lives in terms of school and how the grief was unfolding, especially when it's a sudden death and the child doesn't have time to, I mean, dad just leaves one day and just never comes back. And so it was a huge transition and a very difficult time. And I mean, now we're over that period where, it's like an intense set of phone calls coming in every day from teachers about, different issues. Now we're way over that and way past that, thankfully. But yeah, for those parents who are going through that, it's know that you're not alone. I think a lot of us have faced it, and know that it will, and it does get better for sure. Yeah.
I'm wondering also about your then 8-week-old. I assume has no memories of dad. I guess, have you seen differences, or how do you think that has impacted them as far as, there's an older brother who has at least a little bit of memory. I mean, 3.5 probably is hard, but there's pictures, from the early ages. I guess I wonder if you can comment on having a child who's, I mean, sometimes people lose their spouse while they're pregnant, and then there are literally 0 pictures. But in any case, being too young to remember or have any memories on their own. Any thoughts around your experience with that?
Oh yeah, no, that was a huge difference between the two, for sure. And even in that passage that I read at the beginning, that is hugely influential in that, because for Alex, the one who was 8 weeks old when his dad died, there's just no memory. And it was a point of friction between both brothers, because Matthew remembered quite a bit, and he held it closely. So he remembered, he held on to those memories for dear life. And so he remembered far more than I thought like a 3-year-old would remember. And so whenever he talked about his dad, you know, and Alex would say, but I don't remember that. I don't. And like, even at the name Garfield, you know, Alex would think about Garfield, the cartoon character, and Matthew was just like, no, you don't get it. Like, it's not. And it's so far removed from you. And so it was a point of friction for sure, because Alex just had no memory and no, the connection wasn't as strong for sure. Mm-hmm. While Matthew, you know, that for Matthew, that was his idol. And so it's amazing the things that we have to deal with that we have no idea, but we just kind of deal with them as they come. And so yeah, that was hugely influential in that piece that I wrote, because I was thinking about Alex, and further down in that piece is where I talk about Alex asking me one day, do you remember what his voice sounds like? Because for Alex, he has none of that. Yeah. And that's when I realized that, like those generational pieces of his history, the hear and the voice and all of that comes into that passage that I wrote. It's because of the experience with Alex and him not having that to hold on to. And just imagine your son asking you what his dad sounds like in terms of his voice. It's a day that I'll never, ever forget. And so, yeah, those issues were huge too in terms of the boys and how they dealt with it, and even the relationship between the two of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I guess reflecting back a little bit, what do you wish you'd known about widowed parenting ahead of time?
I would say how difficult it is, and the book and the 32 life lessons. I mean, it started with 40 with the article, but when I talk about things like don't compare yourself to others, ignore the naysayers, those are things directly from my experience with just feeling like, wow, I'm not able to do some of the things other moms and dads are doing. I remember in the early weeks and months after he died, I had no energy. Like I first of all, I mean, Matthew was 3. I didn't have like a lot of extracurricular activities to put him in then. But even a year after or 2 years after, I remember thinking, yeah, I probably won't be able to do what some other parents are capable of doing, because it's just me now. I'm a single mom. I have a job, a 9-to-5 job, and there's so much I can do. And so in the book, and even in the article, when I say just say no and be comfortable saying no, those are some of the things that come to mind in terms of widowed parenting, because you really realize that there are boundaries and there are limits, and it makes no use looking at what others are doing and comparing. It's just making peace with kind of what you can do and what you can provide for your children. And so a lot of those lessons have to do with, like when I talk about goals with wisdom and things like that, having a personal mission. Those are the things that come to me. I mean, a lot of that is borne out for me in terms of being a widowed parent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's talk more about the book then. And you mentioned an article. So can you tell listeners, what is the article that you're talking about?
Yeah, so that article was published on Thrive Global. It was entitled, My Husband Died at 34. Here are 40 life lessons I learned from it. And I published it, I think it was in the December of 2017, and it started to go viral the following month in January. Yeah, because like Thrive Global, the editors at Medium picked it up and said it was one of their best stories for the year. They wanted to do an audio version, and so they recorded it. They just asked my permission. And then they, it was on the front page of Medium for the entire Christmas holiday. So like for 2 weeks, they kept it there, and then it just went off. It just took on a life of its own, and I would just Google it and see it everywhere. And I thought, wow. And it was my most vulnerable piece of writing. It was very personal. And I remember, even writing in there, I walked into the hospital with my husband living and breathing and walked out with a white plastic bag. And so that was my experience. And I wanted to bring it really clearly in front of people, just to give them a sense of how devastating this could be. But the 40 life lessons too were just, things that came out of my experience and what I had learned and what I wanted to pass on, because I thought they were applicable to people, whether or not you had lost a spouse or not. I think for any setback, and there are lessons in there that anybody can take away. So that's how that article came about.
That's awesome. So can you share with us, like, what's one of your favorite lessons from there?
Oh my gosh, like it's hard.
Well,
it's
give us a few. Give us 2, 3, 4. Give us a few of your favorites.
Well, just a couple that I've named so far, like ignoring the naysayers. That one's very personal. Goals with wisdom, having a personal mission, not comparing yourself to others. And those are kind of some of the earlier ones in the book, setting the stage for, listen, you have to deal with this first and know that it's okay. And people are going to say these things, because like in widowhood, especially early widowhood, you get some, you get some comments all the time that are just like, wow, really? Are you saying this now? And so when I say ignore the naysayers, that's what I'm talking about. And, even being a widowed parent, like I had people say to me, they'd bring up experiences of other children that they heard about who were, who had lost parents and who had gone through grief, and they never got good jobs, or they never turned out well, and it was always negative. And I thought, you know what, like, I'm not going to accept negative messaging. I am going to decide, I'm going to go on a path for my family that I think will be good and will do my boys good. And that's what I did. And so, like, when I talk about ignoring the naysayers, a lot of that has to do with widowed parenting, because I went through all of, the comments and what people thought I would be able to do and not be able to do. And, oh yeah, you're a widow now, so do this, do that. And I pushed away a lot of that, because I was like, no, I'm going to define who I am. I'm not going to let people dictate that. I'm going to decide who I am. So some of the ones that really resonate with me are some of those earlier ones, like Ignore the Naysayers, chapter 2, Goals with Wisdom, I think is chapter 4, chapter 5. Having a personal mission, maybe 3, and not comparing yourself to others is chapter 5, I think. But those earlier ones really set the stage for really creating those boundaries that we need to thrive, and really, honing in on what we want, not what society is dictating, but what we really want.
Yeah. So along those lines, you have another post called After Early Widowhood, Defining a Personal Mission is a Must. Let's dig a little bit deeper on that. What is a personal mission statement? Can you give us some examples?
Sure. And, I have some really good ones in the book. And so I came up with that because I thought, you know what, if we're not going to compare ourselves to others, we're going to have to set out on a path that's uniquely ours. And then I thought, well, if we can outline our values and really sit down and think, if I was a spectator at my own funeral, what would I want people to think? Or what would I want as the major themes? What would I want people to take away about me and my legacy? Because like I was in this realm of thinking about our legacy, what we're passing on to the next generation, what we're passing on to humanity. And that's it's grounded in that. And I had so much time to think about, my husband's death, how he was so young, and how he left that legacy, because he did. And, I talk about all of that in the book. Even though he was 34, he had a huge legacy. And so I thought, you know what, and this is what I tell people, that no matter how young you are, you can embark on that, and you can set forth a mission for yourself. And that mission statement can change over time. It's not static. It's very flexible, and it changes, but it's rooted in your unique story, and it's rooted in your story of self. And, I see, you, Jenny, and myself and several other widowed parents that are doing this. We're taking it up as our mission to spread the word and to really create that awareness about what happens during grief and what happens to kids. And part of that is like your personal mission. And I feel like when you become widowed, it's a ripe time, because you're in the realm of, okay, how do I move forward? How do I create a purpose and a mission for myself? How do I redefine myself going forward? And that's why I wrote that article with early widowhood outlining a personal mission is a must. Like, I mean, once you have had time to go through all of, the things in the early parts of widowhood, it's good to sit back and to take a step back and think, okay, where am I going? And, for those of us who have gone through this, Jenny, like, as you know, it's life-changing. And, you'll never be the same. But you want to chart a path forward, and you think, how do I do that? And outlining a mission helps you to just solidify that in your mind. And even if you write it down, it's getting you thinking about, okay, this is what my life will stand for, and this is what I'm going to do. Because going through this experience, it makes you want to be better. It makes you want to contribute to humanity. It makes you want to leave your mark and your legacy, and create a better world than you'll leave it. And so that's where that comes from. And it's one of my favorite chapters, because it lends itself to us not comparing ourselves, because then we're like, okay, this is my mission and I'm different. Like, I've gone through this experience. Maybe not many people have been there at this age, but I have, and there's a reason and for a purpose for this, and I'm going to walk in it, I'm going to claim it, and I'm going to do the best I can to live with it, to live with what I've been through. And so that's kind of where that's coming from.
I love that. It almost sounds like you're suggesting that your life has fallen into a million pieces, and the old life is over now. Rather than kind of maybe randomly putting the pieces back together, it sounds like you're suggesting kind of being deliberate about taking that long view, thinking about that. I think you said, what would you want people to say about you at your funeral? What is that bigger picture, that theme? And then how do you want to put those pieces back together to move forward, and kind of being deliberate about how you're doing that?
Exactly, because that's the idea behind holistic wealth. And that's how we came up with the title. Like, my editor came up with the title, but that's how we came up with it, because we were like, you know what? Having a holistically wealthy lifestyle means being intentional about it. It means having an intentionally designed life. And so if we can be intentional with the decisions that we make, with the moves that we make, then that's getting us on a path to holistic wealth. And that's how I came up with like the holistic wealth method and the holistic wealth mindset. It's kind of looking at every decision as an addition or a depletion to your holistic wealth bank account. And I came up with that because, like, as a widowed parent, like, you can become so stretched. And saying no, for instance, the chapter on saying no and setting boundaries in our lives, I came up with this whole notion that saying no sometimes is an addition to our holistic wealth bank account, because it's giving us the time to prioritize what we really want to focus on. So a lot of people think saying no is probably not good, but sometimes it is good. And so there's a whole framework and method behind living a holistically wealthy life. But the whole thing behind it is being intentional about it, and knowing that with each decision that we make, and once you've been through this experience, every decision, whether big or small, counts. Like we're called upon to make big decisions in the early stages afterwards. Are we going to move to a different city? Are we selling the house? Are we keeping it rented? What are we doing? The funeral, there's everything, childcare, and everything takes thinking in terms of being deliberate and being intentional about having. And I mean, in the beginning, it's not like I was thinking about that, in when it happened to me weeks in. It's not like I was thinking about holistic wealth or anything like that. But, having gone through it and being able to talk to people and being able to spread this message of being intentional, I think that's a good way for us to kind of move forward.
What do you think, was your sabbatical helpful in giving you the time and the space to kind of do some of this thinking?
I think it was hugely helpful. I can guarantee you 100% that if I had not taken that, there's no way I would have been able to put a framework around all of this that I've come up with. But there's so many things that happened to me when I took a break. And I talk about those in the book too. Like I talk about intuition. There's a chapter on intuition. And when I took the break, like my intuition just erupted. Like it was almost as if I was now tuned in to that intuitive voice in a way that I hadn't before. And I remember thinking, what's this? What's happening? And why is it kicking in full force now? And I talk about that in the intuition chapter in the book. And I've interviewed some experts who have their own opinions as to why, because there's a logical reason that when we're busy and we're stressed and we're not taking the time for self-care and reflection, we're drowning out that intuitive voice. We're drowning out all of that and potentially drowning out our purpose and living in a way that we should be, because we're not in tune with our inner selves. And so I talk about that in the book somewhat as well, because I think this sabbatical was the key for me really honing in on kind of what I was taking away from this experience. I mean, besides what was happening to me, it was like, how do I move forward? And then once I started writing, because when I came back, I started writing, I could do so in a more purposeful way, and in a way that I wouldn't just be talking about grief, but I would be talking about, like, there's a framework that we can use, guys. And here's how we can go about being deliberate about how we live our lives, even in the midst of setbacks. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And this discussion about sabbaticals reminded me of an interview I did. I don't forget the episode number. It might be around 35 or 36, specifically on sabbaticals and some ways to do that and some of the value, the benefits.
Right.
So I'd encourage listeners, if you're interested in this topic, to go back and have a listen to that episode as well. Such an important opportunity, I think, to do some reframing and some figuring out what the next steps are.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, this is fantastic. We're approaching the end of our time here. What else do you want us to know about the book?
Well, it's based on that article, and it's the article was 40 life lessons. This is condensed into 32 because we've kind of merged a couple here and there. But I think for widowed parents, it's a wonderful resource, because you'll see coming through every single chapter, because every single chapter starts with my own experience. And of course, I'm a parent first and foremost. So that colors a lot of it. And so you will see a lot of your experiences in there. You will smile at some parts. You'll probably cry at some parts. And I think for widowed parents, it's just a wonderful companion from somebody who's been there, somebody who's kind of taken the time to kind of put a framework around it to kind of help you move forward too. And not only just in the early stages, but like the last chapter is on remarriage. It's on marriage. And that's hugely important as we think about moving forward, whether or not, we want to go that route or not, but it really comes full circle. And so as you start the book and you move through, there are lessons there for every aspect of life, pretty much, as a parent going through this. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, I'll put a link to the book on Amazon in the show notes as well, so people have an easy way to find it. So I'd encourage them to check that out. This is so great. Okay, well, we're almost out of time, so let me just ask you one more question here. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them? If I could say one thing to newly widowed parents, it would be like, know that this is hard. It's going to be difficult in the beginning, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and you will smile again and mean it. I remember when I used to smile, it felt fake, and I felt like the smile just didn't feel genuine. And I want you to know that the time will come when all of that feels genuine from your heart, and your children, they will be okay. And it's one of those times where, we think everything has fallen apart, but there are ways to pick up the pieces, to move forward in a productive and a positive way that can lead to happiness and joy again. And, different things will pop up, but, you go through it and you're stronger for it. And so that's kind of what my parting words would be.
Yeah. Super. Thank you. Well, I think that's the perfect place to end. So my guest today is Keisha Blair, who is a widowed mom and the author of Holistic Wealth, 32 Life Lessons to Help You Find Purpose, Prosperity, and Happiness. So Keisha, where can listeners find you if they would like to learn more about you and your work?
Yep, sure. And so my website is KeishaBlair.com, and there are tons of resources there. There are videos. I'm on social media as well. It's at Keisha O. Blair for both Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And I love to hear from readers. I love hearing, especially from widowed parents. It's always a joy when they reach out to me. And I'd love to hear from readers once they have a chance to read the book. And that would be great.
Fantastic. Okay, well, everybody connect with Keisha on social media and elsewhere. And Keisha, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me, Jenny. It was great. It was great being here.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Keisha Blair as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 44. And so, hey, Children's Grief Awareness Month is in full swing now. It's happening now, November 2019. I hope you're following along on social media. If you're not, you can find me at LiskJenny, LiskJenny. And that's on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Also, this month you can follow the hashtags Children Grieve, all one word, and the hashtag CGAD Hope. So that's Children's Grief Awareness Day, CGAD Hope. Follow those two hashtags for lots of great content from national and local organizations all across the U.S. Who are participating in various ways, sharing information, sharing stories, inspirational things, resources, tons of good content there. So I hope you'll follow along. Also, I wanted to let you guys know, just this week I have published a brand new guide. It is available for a free download, and it's called How to Be Helpful, Tips for Allies of Widowed Parents. And so basically it is my response to the questions that I get all the time. People know about my family's experience and our journey for the last few years, and so all the time I get questions like, my colleague's wife just died and, leaving him with 2 small kids, or my neighbor's husband died and she has 2 teenagers. How can I help them? What can I do? And I've been, answering them one at a time, basically up until now. And I realized that I should just go ahead and put together some information, because sadly it is a very common need, and people really do want to be helpful. And I think, people seem to be glad to have some tips and some ideas from people who've been through it, on how they can be the most helpful. And, a lot of it is based on my own experience. It's also based on all the widowed parents that I've been in contact with, ideas and suggestions and experiences of them as well. So you can actually download that. It's a free download at jennylisk.com/allies, ALLIES. You can find that there, and I'd encourage you to share the link with people that you think might find the content useful. It's really full of information. It's about 10, 12 pages long. Each page is kind of a different topic. So, like, ways to bring food to people. Everybody thinks of bringing a casserole. So what are some kind of additional creative things you can do to bring food? How to help somebody from a distance if you're maybe in a different city or state than they are. Different texts that you can send that are helpful and supportive. Some thoughts around things not to say and then things to say instead. There's a whole page of 25 practical ideas for things you could do to help. Tips on writing condolence cards. So all kinds of information, really. And, this document really is aimed at people who are supporting widowed families. It is obviously broader than that. It's the same tips are helpful for, whether somebody has died, whether somebody is facing a serious or life-threatening illness, whether it is a young widowed person with a family, or whether it's a different type of loss. A lot of the principles, I think, are pretty similar. So I'd encourage you to share that with people. What I'm hearing so far from people who've read the document and downloaded it is they're saying that it's really helpful. The kind of information maybe they wish they'd had sooner when they were supporting somebody in their life. And so it's great to hear really positive feedback, because I did, I put a lot of content into this, and I hope that you guys will find it helpful. So please, again, it's jennylisk.com/allies, and you can find that. And I'm writing a kind of series of written pieces also around that. So look for those on social media as well. And I posted one today, actually, that's kind of an expansion on the how to bring food. So you might find that interesting too. And rounding out the what's coming up next, so we are almost, believe it or not, to the 1-year anniversary of the Widowed Parent podcast. So it launched last year on November 28th. So that was during Children's Grief Awareness Month last year. My goal was to get it out during that month, and I barely squeaked it into the wire. So as we approach the 1-year anniversary here, I'm doing something a little bit different for these next 2 episodes. So the 3rd and 4th weeks in November 2019 here. I'm actually turning over the microphone to my friend Karen Millsap. And Karen is also a widowed parent. And I have asked her to interview me on my show. So, usually I'm on this side of the microphone. I'm the one asking the questions. And this time we turn the tables and she's asking me questions. And so in the first part, which will be the 3rd week in November, first part is more about my journey, how I became a widowed parent, some of that, the early parts of the journey. And honestly, she asks me a lot of the same questions that I ask my guests to reflect on. So that was great to talk to her about those. And then in part 2, we talk more about the podcast and how I got that started and what some of the challenges have been, what's been really fun about it, some of the things that I've learned, and just, all about the podcast. So I love talking with Karen across these 2 episodes. We had a lot of fun. And as I said, I turned over the microphone. So that was kind of a fun experiment, and a little different. But anyway, I loved it. It was great. And I really appreciate Karen taking the time to talk to me, so that we can bring this discussion to all of you. So, with all that said, I think that is all for this week. So go ahead and connect on social media if you haven't already, at LiskJenny on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And please do share the episodes. If you found maybe the one recently with Judy's House about some of the research they've done, share that one if you found it interesting, or if you know somebody who would. Also, my recent episode kicking off Children's Grief Awareness Month with Vicki J. from the National Alliance for Grieving Children. Another great discussion there. They have tons of resources, so if you're looking for a grief center in your local community, do take a look at their website. You can look by state. And also they have a list in Canada as well. Sadly, for my international listeners, they do not have other countries. So I'll keep working on bringing resources there. Anyway, that is all for this week. So thank you very much for listening. And until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.